Taxpayers League of Minnesota podcast. I'm Ted Lilly, president of the Taxpayers League, and I am joined by
Margaret Martine, research director of the Taxpayers League.
Well, Margaret, happy Friday the 13th. I think there are black cats flying around at the Capitol as far as getting this session done.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if they got a deal done on the Friday the 13th, but I don't think so, though, because I think the governor is...
He's fishing.
Yeah, he's going up to the McGregor for the fishing opener, and, well, the House is in session right now, so there's no conference committees meeting right now. They've taken care of some calendar bills and working their way towards the end of the session.
Well, maybe Speaker Dowd and Majority Leader Bach and the governor can meet while they're dipping their lines, along with the co-governor, Tina Smith.
Yeah, that's right.
She's up there also.
Yeah, there was a big piece on Tina Smith this week in MinPost. A very glowing account of her, a puff piece. Lots of people saying basically it's the pre-campaign of Tina Smith running for governor, and it certainly looked that way in that article.
Yes. There's been a lot of speculation about Governor Dayton. Is he going to finish out his term? He, of course, would vehemently say absolutely, of course he is. But there's speculation that he might resign prior to the end of his term and appoint her or have her fill in. I guess that's the constitutional way that works.
Right.
And then she'd be the incumbent going into the election.
Yep.
But I know there are others on the Democratic side who are interested in running for governor, so I'm not sure how that works. In the past, the anointed ones don't always make it through on the Democratic side.
No, they don't. Although there are some independent Democrats out there, like, for example, Lori Swanson has been talked about as running for governor, and certainly in the legislature, you've got a number of people who might want to run.
Not to mention the past Minneapolis mayor, who is basically positioning himself
yes,
for this.
Archie Ryback is positioning himself for a run.
Yes. So anyway, all speculation, just interesting.
Yep.
But Margaret, May 15th is coming up. Today is the 13th. Property taxes are due. Mail out your property taxes if you're not escrowing those taxes. Those taxes continue to grow because a lot of the bonding and the levies have passed in most of the communities.
That's right.
So your taxes are continuing to go up on those local taxes. We're not just talking about the statewide taxes, federal taxes. The local taxes are also growing at this time, and we need to pay attention. But make sure you get those in the mail. They have to be postmarked by tomorrow, by Saturday the 14th, in order to have them count as being postmarked by the 15th. So make sure that happens. Well, 10 days to go, Margaret. They have to be done by Monday the 23rd. Today is the 13th, so
That's right.
10 days left. And of course, they're working on their top priorities, like figuring out Prince's estate and figuring out eyelashes.
Figuring out
eyelashes. This is crazy. Instead of working on the bonding bill, the tax bill, transportation, and supplemental spending, they're working on eyelashes and Prince.
Well, the Prince thing was weird. It just came out, obviously Prince just died during session a few weeks ago, and so suddenly handling large estates is a big item for the legislature now.
Right. And me, being the optimist that I am, when I heard that they were working on a Prince bill, I was hopeful that they were working on the estate tax, conforming to the federal tax levels and reducing Minnesota's ceiling, the floor on the taxes, to the same level as the federal. But obviously that's not what they were doing. That's too optimistic.
No. Basically it's to protect people or names and properties, right, after they die? Okay.
Right. To protect Prince's heirs,
yes.
His siblings, and I understand now that there's one potential offspring.
Potential offspring, yes.
Somebody in jail in Colorado, I believe, that says he might be a son.
Yeah. Well, also there's a mother is claiming that her child is a son of Prince. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And they're doing the DNA test on that now, so we really don't know. As far as we knew, he only had one offspring, and who died tragically.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see if he had other offspring.
But I'm curious, Margaret, so we have our deadlines in the legislature. How did this bill get through? Was it attached to another bill?
No.
Because it obviously wasn't there to meet the first deadline of making it through committees.
Well, here's the little thing, the sort of asterisk that we talked about a long time ago when we talked about the deadlines. Most bills have to go through that process, and if they miss a deadline, they miss a deadline. But there is still a way for bills to come through. One was the way where you basically take a bill that has met deadline, and then you attach new amendment to it, or even could have a delete all amendment, which completely guts the old bill and puts a new bill in its place, but keeps the same number and keeps everything the
Right.
same in terms of the process, and gets to keep the fact that it made deadline. So the vehicle bill is one way, but then you have straight up waiver of the rule, and we're going to see a lot more of that. What has to happen is there's an extra step. The bill
So it
has
goes
to
through
go.
the Rules Committee.
Right, the bill has to go, in order to transit from one committee to another or to the floor, it has to go to Rules Committee first. But that can happen pretty quick, because Rules Committee is a committee that all they do is just process those bills. There's usually not a policy debate. There was one, actually, a policy debate in Rules Committee this year where we heard Minority Leader Thiessen go and try to change a bunch of rules for how the House conducts its business. That's very unusual. Usually the Rules Committee meets for like 10 minutes, and all they do is waive rule for Bill X, gavel, and that's it. And so we've seen a number of bills get that kind of treatment where they've gone to Rules Committee, get the rule waived, and then they're on the floor. In fact, we were going to have one probably for the fantasy sports bill. It probably was going to get waived through to the House floor, but now that it was killed in the Senate, maybe it's not a priority anymore.
It's not going to happen.
So, but it actually could have been, had the rule waived and gotten on the floor in the same day. Wouldn't require another day for that.
So the rules
it would require another day for third reading, but anyway.
Yeah. So the rules are basically there to block people in the legislature that want things to happen that the leadership on either side doesn't want to happen. So because if the leadership decides they want it, they waive the rule, and it makes it through.
Yep.
But if you're looking for a tax decrease, to lower the taxes or to do something
anything
substantial,
controversial is not going to take that path usually. I mean, unless they're really willing to go pedal to the metal on it. And yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But all this talk about hearing it in committees, everything like that, they can get by it. They can find a way past it if they want to. So let's quickly, just discuss what is in this actual Prince bill.
Okay.
So what they're doing is they're rushing to enact a law that would restrict the use of Prince's name, likeness, image, et cetera, et cetera. He's already got protections for his music and his artwork and things like that, but this is his likeness.
Yep.
And it's for his estate, so whoever controls his estate controls these images.
Right.
And it's for commercial use, not for sports teams or for other, for someone putting a t-shirt that two people wear. It's not for that. But if you're going to sell the image, then it's to protect the estate.
Sure.
Any of those kinds of things.
What about that symbol that he used to be?
Well, yeah, I'm sure that's part of his trademarked trademarked imagery.
It is, yeah.
Yes. So there is a fair use exemption for it, but it's really for his heirs. That's the purpose of doing this.
Right.
Anyway, so yes, we're rushing through the Prince thing. And the other one that's come up, and they've had a lot of fun with this one, but frankly, we think they ought to be focusing on the job at hand, is an eyelash bill that Senator Ingebretson has brought through in the Senate, and it's also going through the House. And who is working on it there?
It's Representative Mary Franzen.
Yeah. Okay. So basically what it is they're looking at the regulation of the industry of extending eyelashes.
Yes, which is kind of like it, at nail salons and cosmetology type of stuff. That's usually where this kind of thing is done. There's spas and all that.
But the Senate had a lot of fun with Senator Ingebretson, telling him that he's going to try to get this passed in a blink of an eye. Everybody's winking around the room. all these things. They were having a lot of fun. But Margaret, really, there is some basis to this.
Well, it's kind of like the hair braiders and the eyebrow threaders. I mean, these are new kind of things that are in the cosmetology area, and the problem is that as they come online, they then fall under the cosmetology licensure rubric, and which is actually pretty serious. I mean, you have to go through classes and training, many hours of practice, classroom, and we're talking about things that probably somebody has learned as an apprentice because they're not schools that are set up for this yet. This is new technology, new stuff. And so the idea that somehow we can regulate these businesses better than the way that it's come about, sort of naturally. I mean, the eyebrow threading I know more about than the eyelash thing, but the threading came up because it's actually a well-recognized practice in India and Africa and other places. And so you've got women who have tons of experience doing this. It's a fairly safe procedure. It's very unusual that bad things happen. And then, so now suddenly they have to go to classes and they have to spend all this money. And these are often not women that are well off. They're immigrant businesses. And the hair braiding was probably the first one, where you had, I remember speaking to a woman actually when the Institute for Justice was taking up this case, that these hair braiders who did nothing but braid hair, they didn't wash hair, they didn't cut hair, they didn't do anything like that. They were going to have to go through the full barbering or hair salon training at enormous cost, and in a sense they were already violating the law by having a shop that did hair braiding because they were covered under this other rubric. So I mean, it prevents people from getting jobs, really, especially people. I mean, you don't need to know English. You don't need to do, you can just set up shop. If you have the skill, you should be able to use that skill to make money. And so hair braiders were the first ones who got that exemption where they didn't have to have all that background. And then threaders were next, and now we're seeing this one for the eyelashes. And it's just a matter of thinking it through that, well, do we really need to have this kind of high barrier to entry for a skill that people want, and that the government has to insert itself in this process. You can't do anything anymore now without the government saying you can, which is kind of you could call it the French model of government. If it's not in the law, then it's not allowed, as opposed to if it's not in the law, if the law is silent, then you can do it. And that's the way the American way has always been, is if it's not in the law, then there's nothing that the government has to say about it. Government has to now have a say about absolutely everything.
Everything. And again, it's about overregulation. Last week we talked about the state of Michigan and the fact that they're eliminating thousands of regulations, trying to make business simple. Here in Minnesota, we're regulating, and as I understand what this law does is it limits that regulation that would be applied.
Yeah, they basically made a compromise because the overregulators wanted to regulate them, and so this brings up a compromise situation where they have to have a certain amount of training, and that's it, and it's defined in the law. So, it's one of these things where the people who don't want the regulation are just coming up and saying, please don't hurt me too much.
Well, effectively what they're doing is they're building a moat around this industry, this service.
Right.
And instead of letting the administration decide how much over-regulation to do, they're saying, all right, let's put a little bit in, we can say we did it,
right,
and then move on.
Right.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's awful, the way that this is coming about. I mean, every new technology is going to get a new bill, and it's just going to get, the licensure thing is going to get more and more complex, not more reduced the way it should be.
Yep. Well, the other big thing that happened this week outside of the Capitol is that the Star Tribune came out with an article basically disputing all of the media, all of the conversations that have been having about whether the big tax increase, the 25% tax increase on the wealthy that Governor Dayton and the DFL-controlled legislature put on the wealthy in Minnesota, whether that was making them leave the state of Minnesota. And the Center of the American Experiment, Peter Nelson, put together a piece that did a study, and it demonstrated that in fact people are leaving the state of Minnesota for lower tax places. And the Minnesota Business Journal did a multi-page story also about the Great Migration, about the billions of dollars that are fleeing Minnesota because of higher taxes. Put the numbers behind it, did the research, and found people to talk about it. Well, the Star Tribune came out and they had a front page, top of this page story, saying that the tax hike is not chasing the rich from Minnesota. So they came out with another story. And Margaret, just on the surface, I have to believe that the administration came to the Star Tribune, to their big mouth piece, and said, hey, we need a story that confronts this other data that's out there. Wouldn't you think that happened?
I believe that it would, because they're very zealous about guarding the image, and I know that I'm on a couple different administration email lists whenever they publish new data, and this came out before they had actually published revenue data, so I'm sure they shopped it to the Star Tribune and said, hey, we've got some data that contradicts this, why don't you write a story about it?
Yeah, I'm guessing that's what happens, exactly what happens. Maybe it was Tina Smith that contacted them. But anyway, in this...
No, it was probably Myron France, because he's in the media all the time.
Yes. Well, anyway, in this story in the Star Tribune, and it's by Adam Belts and Patrick Coolican.
Yeah, so the political writer, Coolican, and the business writer, Belts. So they paired up both of them.
Curious that they would put those two together. Why do you think that happened?
Because they wanted to make political points off of it.
Yep.
So, yeah, Coolican makes sense.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'd be buried in the business section.
Not on the front page.
Not on the front page of the Star Tribune.
Yes. So in this story, just taking pieces of it and reading it, Dayton argues that the taxes are not the driving force behind the migration into or out of Minnesota. A change in residency is a decision involving many considerations, including jobs, family, and weather, etc., etc. Even if the tax is figured in, he said, we're already high taxed in Minnesota before 2013 when the rate was 7.85%. Well, okay, so Dayton can say that. I mean, he can say that, and again, that's what they're leading off in the story, so it's obviously from Governor Dayton. But we know that this isn't the case. I mean, we're talking with people all the time who are concerned about the taxes in Minnesota and the impact on their family. And if you have a
And who are making plans to leave.
Who are absolutely making plans. Many have left. But Governor Dayton says that that isn't the case, that they're not leaving for that reason. But continuing with this story, New Jersey, we heard about that in the media this past week. Mm-hmm. They lost a single billionaire hedge fund owner who left the state and basically put their whole state budget in trouble.
Yes.
They can't make their budget because one person left.
Right, that evil guy.
But Chair Davids, a Republican from Preston, he said that if you tax something more, you get less of it. You tax cigarettes, you get less smoking. You tax income, you get less income. Mm-hmm. Well, that's obvious. I mean, we know that that is the case.
Right.
Otherwise, why would the Democrats be taxing cigarettes at the level they are?
Yep.
Their whole argument is to get less of it, right?
Right.
But that doesn't apply to income taxes. So one of the things that this article says is that nobody can point to a single individual who says they left the state because of it. Not pointing to a specific cases of people moving, citing privacy concerns and fears that the state will retaliate.
Yep.
John Christensen, an accountant in Wilmore, said that he's aware of 12 wealthy people in his community who moved away and 6 who expanded their businesses in other states. Well, we know that happens.
Yes.
Businesses are deciding all the time to expand someplace else because of what's happening in Minnesota.
Right.
3M did it years ago when they grew their business in Austin, Texas. There's just an article recently about Mayo Clinic spending $100 million in Florida. And where does Mayo have their other facilities? They're in Florida and Arizona, both low-tax states.
Yeah, well, in these big businesses, it's not like you can see them walking out the door unless you have something like a merger or some acquisition where they're actually physically moving a lot of people.
Right.
A lot of times, it's very slow attrition. They just decide not to do something in Minnesota. They decide to do it in one of their other locations. Mm-hmm. So you don't actually see it until the last person is leaving and shutting off the lights, but the damage has been done years before.
Right.
And that gives the state an opportunity, probably. I mean, these companies all have long-term views. They think, well, maybe things will change. Maybe they'll get better, or maybe they'll get worse somewhere else, or where they won't want to expand. And so they don't move really fast. They move slowly. And so by the time you actually see something, it's probably too late. It's probably they've already made that decision and it's in stone and they're done. That's
right. Well, we'll spend a lot more time talking about this in another podcast. We'll probably devote a whole podcast to this after the session is over.
That's right.
But just basically the facts from the article are that the Star Tribune is saying that the number of individuals who earn $1 million or more have grown 15% in the 1 year after the tax increase happened. But of course, remember, there's only 1 year of tax data that they have. So this tax increase happened in 2013. In 2014, there was a 15% increase in the people who earned $1 million or more. They also said that there are 64,000 people in Minnesota that are in that top bracket, which is now 9.85%, the third highest high tax bracket in the country. And that bracket grew by 6%. So again, the data is for 1 year that the numbers grew. But these decisions take time, and they take time to happen.
Right.
But there also are some very interesting things in here in the Star Tribune article about our neighboring states. And basically what they're pointing out is that Minnesota, even though our numbers grew, we grew nowhere near as much as our neighboring states did.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, since 2005, Wisconsin has gone from 2,000 people to 5,000. Minnesota's gone from 4,800 to 6,200. So Wisconsin has almost caught up to us as far as million people
Yeah, that's
earning
pretty
$1 million a year.
amazing. In fact, I'm going to take a picture of that and post it on Facebook and see what people have to say about that.
Yes.
But that's like a buried nugget in this article.
Well, it's there, but they don't talk about it in the article.
Yeah,
at
I
all.
know, exactly. It's like, yeah, don't look at this piece that this graph that we just put on the side here.
So the people earning $1 million or more in Minnesota has grown 30% since 2005. So in those 10 years, Wisconsin has grown 85%.
That's huge.
Iowa has grown 80%, and they don't even put it on the chart that the state of South Dakota has grown 4 times, 400%.
Wow.
And that's not even on the chart, how much South Dakota has grown, who of course has no income tax.
Yes.
So how many people have left the western border of Minnesota for South Dakota, still run their business, still serve their customers in Minnesota, but they've left the state?
Yep.
So these things are happening, and Governor Dayton says that there's no way that people are afraid of paying their taxes and of leaving the state of Minnesota, that this is unfounded.
Right.
But that being said, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce and the Minnesota Business Partnership couldn't find a single person to go on record that they left the state or are planning to leave the state.
Yeah.
And Governor Dayton says it's unfounded and spurious charge that we would retaliate against people for exercising their First Amendment rights.
We already know that they're very aggressive with their tax analytics programs and trying to figure out how to make sure that they get every last cent out of people.
Of course they are.
So why would people step forward and say, hey, I found a way to not have to pay my, high Minnesota taxes? Why would they step forward? What is in it for them? I mean, there really isn't any good that can come from that. They mostly are probably just happy to get away.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and Governor Dayton conflicts himself right in this article, because another thing he says, if they don't like our tax, they have a right to do so, to leave the state of Minnesota. But they shouldn't be coming back here for 6 months a year to take advantage of Minnesota state services that other Minnesotans are paying for.
Oh, how nice.
Wow. So let's put a border fence up.
Yeah.
Come on, let's keep people out that we don't want here.
Yes, that's right. We don't want them spending their money here at all.
Paying sales tax.
Paying
We don't want
sales
their
tax.
tourism. We don't want them donating to United Way in Minnesota.
That's right.
Any of that. Well, again, it's ludicrous of him to say that they don't pursue people, because the state of Minnesota has a 26-point test that someone has to pass in order to leave the state of Minnesota.
That's right.
And there's one quote in the Business Journal's piece that says, Minnesota is so aggressive and punitive in taxation, it makes you dislike the state. I lived here all my life, 60 plus years, and I don't have any interest to go back there because of the bad attitude the state has for its successful people.
Wow. Who said that?
Well, he's afraid to say. Because they might retaliate against
Right.
him.
Oh, man. Wow.
It's a veteran Minnesota venture capitalist who moved in 2013, and he moved $21.5 million, $5 million in annual taxable income to another state because of this new tax increase.
Wow. Well, yeah, and here on the one hand, we're trying to do all these angel investor credits and all this stuff, and yet the bigger picture is so bad that people do
Yes.
not want to come here.
Yes.
That have a
It's
lot
awful.
of wealth to invest in all the businesses and stuff that we have here.
Well, the Star Tribune piece does go after the center of the American experiment and Peter Nelson a little bit, and says that the facts aren't there. But they don't even mention the Business Journal article. And again,
Yeah, well,
we'll
because
spend-
that one's the more potent one, because they actually
Right.
quote people.
Right, exactly. But just some of the tidbits in this Minnesota Business Journal, let me just do a couple of them. 68% increase in the past 5 years in the number of Minnesotans obtaining a Florida driver's license. 68% increase. The number one reason people give for leaving the state of Minnesota? Income tax. Number one reason. $5.2 billion is the median annual taxable income Minnesota is expected to lose by 2020. $5.2 billion.
Well, that's the other thing, is that this article on the Star Tribune is really overblowing a snapshot in time, which a very actually small slice of time when you're talking about taxes. because people don't just get up and leave quickly especially if they have assets and businesses. They can't do that. I mean, it takes a while for this, and by the time that process completes, you're done. I mean, you're going to have to try to get new people back in here.
Right, right. Well, and again, we've talked before, there were 21 Fortune 500 companies in Minnesota before Governor took office. Now
Right.
there are 16 left.
Yep.
How in the world do you create 5 new Fortune 500 companies? I mean,
Right.
it takes decades, it takes years to create these.
Right.
$31 billion is the median gross estate value that's leaving the state of Minnesota.
Wow.
$62 billion is the median net worth expected to leave by 2020, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of information here in
Yeah.
these three different pieces.
Well, yeah. So I mean, this piece is really taking a lot of liberties with a snapshot of data, and it's also not really looking at a lot of different categories of wealth and capital. Really, it's actually not looking at capital; it's looking at income.
Right.
And your capital investment is just as important as your income, because it tells you over the long haul whether people are going to be sticking around, whether there's continued growth in the economy. I mean, one of the things that is important to remember too is that the tax revenues may have gone up because people are taking tax charges on stuff that happened, with the Obamacare and
yes.
a lot of these other tax increases. They put the hit off as long as they can, but eventually they have to take it.
Yes.
And this is probably the period in which they took it. So the next series of data should really tell us more about what the long-term prognosis is. But of course they're going to trumpet this because this is the best they're going to get.
Right, right. And again, what is going to happen is that people will make these decisions about where to invest their futures. We would love to see them invest their future in Minnesota. That is the goal. And we're giving them an incentive to leave the state of Minnesota to go someplace else.
Right.
High income, high earning folks are going to be leaving the state.
Oh, but Governor Dayton doesn't care.
Governor Dayton doesn't. But he will care because our state income will go down because of it.
Yeah, but he'll be out of office by then, and he'll probably be in Florida or in South Dakota. The Dayton Trust is in South Dakota.
Exactly. So anyway, we will come back to this. We'll spend a lot of energy on this, but we wanted to report on it and discuss it this week.
Yeah, because it
came
deserves
out.
a response. Obviously, the conservatives are back on their heels a bit because of the way that they got blasted in this, and they really shouldn't be, because it's just not. It's looking at a very small slice of time and saying, "Oh, look, we've got an uptick here." But the important thing to remember is that it's not that much of an uptick when you look at the other states. And secondly, there's a lot of other factors which cause this slight ripple, really.
Yes, yes. And long term, the impact on the state of Minnesota, this could be devastating. This could be an awful situation. Could be like the New Jersey situation.
Right.
Not that we have one person that would leave the state, but if you have hundreds of them that are growing their businesses someplace else,
Yep.
eventually the state of Minnesota will fall behind. Period.
Right.
All right, Margaret, let's move on to the session.
Right.
A lot happening this week, a lot of productive conversation, but
Well-
there hasn't been any consequence. They haven't finished their work. There's nothing really getting done.
Well, I mean, they're passing a lot of bills in the House and the Senate, but yeah, I think that most of the stuff that's getting done is the non-controversial stuff, for which there's kind of like a work ethic about that stuff, where they meet, like the House met today, Friday, which is unusual, to do a whole bunch of bills. The problem is that some of the biggest pieces they're passing different versions in the House and the Senate that are completely at odds. Like, for example, yesterday they passed in the House the IRRB bill, Representative Chair Hackbarth's bill, that basically abolishes the IRRB and changes it up the governance structure of it quite a bit. The Senate has a reform bill, but it doesn't look anything like that. In fact, the House bill, it's interesting because it doesn't actually even have a Senate companion, and nor does the Senate bill have a companion that's moved at all. And so it's really kind of interesting to see whether anything is going to happen on some of these big things that they're passing, because they don't look at all alike and they are completely at odds.
Well, let's take a few minutes here. So there are 10 days left to go.
Yep.
The governor's fishing, and the other leaders will be up fishing
Yep.
here for the weekend. But they basically have next week, the weekend, and Monday.
Yep.
That's what is left of the session.
Yep.
So what is the possible outcome, or what is the track that might work to get to the finish line here? One of the things, the chair of the bonding bill in the House, Representative Paul Torkelson, he did a column in his local papers talking about bonding and some of the things, and we'll go into detail on the bonding bill a little bit later. But one of the things that he said is that basically the bonding will take a back seat to the tax bill and the transportation bill. That we will work on the bonding bill after we approve our transportation and tax relief bills. So basically the bonding is not going to happen. It'll be the back step after the other bills. So continuing with the Chair Torkelson's article, one of the things that he's trying to do is he's trying to get back to a point of having some guidelines or some limits in what we spend on bonding. He points out that bonding isn't free, that debt service payments in the state of Minnesota have grown from $409 million in 2008 to $752 million in 2015. So these are the payments, the annual payments on the bonding that we're doing.
Yeah, well, we talked last time about the Pratt amendment in the Senate and the Vogel bill in the House, and about how Republicans are really starting to train their fire on this growth in the debt service, and the fact that, this tussle over, who has control over setting the bonding limit. And that it's been a governor-driven process in the past, but obviously the House Republicans don't, and the Senate Republicans don't trust MMB anymore, because MMB is kind of like waving the credit card around, saying, "Hey, we got lots left."
Right. Well, MMB is the governor. I mean, the governor
Yeah,
is MMB.
right,
I mean, he
right.
controls the commissioner, and he controls the
Right.
situation. So,
Yep.
so basically, what they've done is they've removed the guidelines that were there in the past.
Well,
under
they
Valenti.
expanded them. They've said basically we can borrow a lot more based on our own estimation of what we think we can pay.
But again, it's not even what we can pay; it's what we can borrow.
Right.
They're looking at what they can borrow. We feel, Torkelson feels, that we should get back to talking about what we are paying.
Exactly. No,
So-
that's right.
So that really is the concern. There was a 30-year guideline that the spending, the annual spending on bonding, on the capital investments, should be 3% of the general fund. And that was removed under the last years of Valenti in 2009. But Governor Dayton has exploded that since
Yep.
then.
Yep.
When the DFL controlled the House and the Senate, and during the Great Recession, the argument was, well, this is the time to spend on bonding because it creates jobs.
Right.
And it has continued since.
Right.
And the bonding has exploded, continued, and grown and grown.
Well, now
and
they're
grown.
saying it's because the rates are still low. We gotta max things
Might as
out
well
now.
borrow now,
Yeah.
max out the credit card.
Yeah.
But what they're not talking about is the fact that we have spent so much on bonding for the last few years since the Great Recession that our payments really are growing
Starting to get
significantly.
A big
And
chunk of that.
It's getting to be a big part of the budget.
Yep.
So this is really a concern. So we do need some guidelines, we need some restrictions, we need some controls, we need some parental controls on what we're doing there.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And really, one of the concerns with this bonding is that we as a society are aging. We're getting older.
Yep.
So as people move from working age to retirement age in the state of Minnesota, who's going to pay these bills?
Right.
As we continue to spend, well, that's our children that are paying these bills.
Yes.
And they won't be able to afford to pay for what we are spending today.
Right. Well, the Republicans in the House have been taking a lot of heat from the DFL this week on Twitter, on Facebook, everywhere. I mean, they're sticking with this theme that they've been ever since the Senate came out with their bonding bill, with where's the House bonding bill, where's the House bonding bill, where's the House bonding bill. And the Speaker actually has said that they have one, they just haven't released it yet. The main thing is that they don't, the size of the bonding bill, that the $600 million figure, if they made a bonding bill that size, would they have enough votes to pass it? And Minority Leader Thiessen pretty much taunted the Speaker when they came out with their target for bonding and said, you're not going to get any votes from us. And so that's what the Speaker has been using to say, well, why should I put it out there? Because you're just going to vote it down. I'm not going to let what happened in the Senate happen here.
Yeah, so in other words, it's just like the Senate, where it was too big to pass.
Yeah.
I mean, the $1.4 billion was way too big. They couldn't get the Republican votes to support it, so it didn't pass.
Yeah, but the weird thing is that they they really only needed one more vote. So you really have to wonder, what the problem was, that with that figure. I think there's a little bit of gamesmanship being played on that side as well, because certainly the Senate wanted to come out ahead with their bonding bill so that they could then pound the House with it, and the Republicans weren't willing to go for that.
Right. But Margaret, in this end of session tactic here, it is confusing and it is challenging to see what the path is to finishing the session.
Right.
I just don't know that there's an outcome that works here.
Well,
that's clean. And one of the things that really, to me, surprises me is the DFL tax bill. They throw out this late session, end of session trial balloon on this Family Leave Act. I mean, come on, this is not going to pass.
Well,
and here they are putting all this energy into
shifting the
this.
discussion to the other part of the big four, as we call them, from bonding to taxes. That bill was actually very interesting. It had some non-controversial things in it, which will probably end up in the tax bill, if there's a tax bill. But yeah, the Family and Medical Leave Act was a big one, and that's a huge, creating almost a new workers' comp or unemployment fund type of thing. So setup costs, getting the fund started, regulating all the situations under which it will fall. I mean, this is like a huge expansion of government. Huge. And mostly,
and to throw it in at the end of the session here, when it obviously isn't going to pass in the other house, how does that get us to the finish line? It simply can't.
Right. Well, there's that. What else is in that bill? Oh, the IRRB Senate version was amended into that bill, which obviously the House has problems with. The St. Paul Soccer Stadium is in this bill. The exemption from property taxes and the building materials thing is in there. And
the siding
deal
business
that we talked about last time to attract that one business up to IRRB area.
The ghost funding gift grant, whatever you want to call it, to create 250 jobs.
Yeah, so I mean, the citizenship credit for people becoming citizens, which I don't know what's changed, but it used to be that becoming a citizen didn't really cost any money. I mean, if you needed to get English classes or if you wanted to take a class, I mean, the materials are all available for free. Mm-hmm. And yet they're talking about, oh, it's so expensive to become a citizen. I mean, are people hiring lawyers now to become citizens? It doesn't, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward process. I don't understand what's costing so much money. I mean, they have to pay for bribes or something? I mean, I don't know. I mean, my dad became a citizen, and I remember he just had to take a test, and they asked him a bunch of questions, and then that was it. I mean, the time period is not flexible. You have to be here for a certain amount of time. I mean, what is it that's costing so much money that we need a tax credit for this? I can understand trying to encourage people to become citizens, but it doesn't seem like you'd have that much of a cost to do that. But anyway, so all these little bells and whistles on various things, all of them are crammed into this bill. Credit for parents of stillborn children, obviously a very sad situation, but once again, what's driving this? I mean, why now are we putting things like this together in this bill?
Well, that would traditionally be in the last year budget bill, not in the bonding year.
Right, yeah.
Big topics like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just a very odd collection of stuff, plus these big controversial pieces, all crammed into this secondary bill, but we can expect most of the pieces to show up as amendments if the tax committee starts meeting and seriously putting together something.
And then the liquor bill was there too.
Well, that was in the House this week. Yeah,
okay.
the liquor bill was in the House this week. The one tie-in is probably the soccer stadium got its liquor license, even though it's not built yet. It's got a liquor license all set up for it. That will probably pass handily in the Senate because it's basically just a bunch of liquor licenses for entities across the state. So that was done yesterday afternoon. And of course, we had the perennial run at Sunday sales. It didn't make it again, but
in the House.
In the House, right. The Senate is not interested in Sunday sales at all. So even if it had passed the House, it wouldn't have gone anywhere for sure. But I watched that vote because I like to see whether the numbers shift at all. Actually, it got one fewer vote this year than last year. I haven't gone over the roll call sheet yet. It did pick up a couple more supporters, so it must have lost some people. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably because except for some hardcore supporters from a long time ago, like Phyllis Kahn, and I guess Tina Liebling is also another supporter.
Phyllis Kahn got rather vicious with some of her
She got pretty vicious
members.
With her own side, yeah, and that's kind of interesting that she went that to really. I mean, she always gets very passionate about this because she really believes strongly in this Sunday sales liquor freedom or whatever you want to call it, you know. Um,
But they usually reserve their viciousness for people in the other party.
yeah, well, she tweeted, she had an interesting tweet. She said something about this is where Democrats support repressive government, Republicans are anti-free market or something like that. You know, this is the one vote when this happens. And anyway, so yeah, she was pretty vicious to members on her own side. There are all kinds of arguments that are made about this bill that with no data really supporting any of the arguments. Like there's going to be more drunk driving accidents. There's going to be more alcoholics. There's just because booze is available on another day of the week. People are saying, well, why don't you have liquor delivered to your house? I mean, that was my representative said that. Why don't you, if you can't take the time to go shopping on Saturday, why don't you have booze delivered to your house? Well, there are two problems with that. One is you actually have to have someone over 18 to receive the booze at your house.
Yep.
And secondly, if you live in greater Minnesota, I don't think the liquor stores deliver, 50, 60 miles away.
Right.
So that was kind of short-sighted on his part. I realize he's from North Minneapolis and downtown, and I'm sure there's lots of booze stores that deliver, but that's a very narrow view of how people actually buy alcohol.
Mm-hmm. So anything else on the tax bill, Senate tax bill, or anything else there?
No, I mean, there's an expanded working family credit that the governor wants in this second tax bill. I'm calling it second because obviously we have the one that's still in conference.
And again, in a nutshell, so last session there was a tax bill passed in the House
Right.
and in the Senate.
Right, different tax bills.
It is in conference committee.
Yep.
It is still on hold in conference
Right.
committee. And this new Senate tax bill is basically an add-on of additional policies to throw into the mix of the other bill.
Right, pretty much. That's the way we would expect it, is that for pieces of it to come out. Although, I mean, I suppose they could, now that they've passed it, it could go over the House, and the House Tax Committee could hear it, probably will. And then I guess they could use this as a basis to build a new tax bill rather than work with the old bill. But, one way or the other, some of these pieces will end up in some kind of attempt at compromise, I would assume.
But in contrast, the House is basically continuing with their existing tax bill on the whole.
Yes, they don't have a new tax bill as I understand it at this point.
So
There's really no reason to, because they everything that they've said so far is that they're standing pat with what their offer was last year until we get to the point where people are talking to each other and negotiating this. We won't really see anything different.
So the House is basically saying, look, we had two tax bills last year. It was complex. We couldn't finish it last year. We couldn't
Right.
agree last year. Let's not add to this. The Senate DFL is basically saying, look, even though we couldn't agree last year,
Here's a whole bunch of other stuff.
Here's a bunch of new stuff, new toys, new gimmicks, new trial balloons we're going to throw up to
Right.
make it even more complex and make sure we can't finish on time.
Right.
We're going to obfuscate and make sure that there's no way that we can finish this session on time. That's what the Senate DFL is doing at this point.
Yeah,
with their tax bill.
everybody seems to be doubling down, but especially on the tax bill, the Senate's really doubling down on all the things that they want to see.
Yes.
And it's just really amazing how much
Ten-
added weight this bill has on a number of things. And there's nothing in here. I mean, the only thing I can see on here that, other than non-controversial things like the charitable food donation credit and things like that and the federal conformity provisions that they have in here, the angel tax credit is the only thing I can see here that the Republicans might be interested in.
Well, the federal conformity. So you're saying that they are conforming with the federal estate tax?
No, not that.
No,
no,
that's
no,
not
no,
in
no,
there.
no. No way.
No.
Yeah, no. It's all, sort of generalized tax credit stuff.
All right, so again, the challenge is going to be to finish the tax bill by the end of the session.
Yep.
Before the session started, the governor, Senator Bach, and the speaker, Dowd, all said that we can pass a tax bill this year. And it's looking very difficult.
It's looking pretty grim.
And the path is looking like it probably is not going to happen.
Right.
That would be, at this point,
They're pretty far apart.
someone would have to give in.
Yeah.
And it's unlikely.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the one that's even harder than this, and that's the transportation bills.
Yes, there was movement this week on the transportation bills, however. It really was. There's been now a full exchange between the Democrat Senate and the Republican House. The first offer that was made by the Democrats was on the gas tax, which Republicans don't want at all. They said they would lower it from 16 cents a gallon to 12 cents a gallon over 3 years, so phased in, to see whether the Republicans would bite on that one. Republicans said, no, we don't want any gas tax. We don't care if it's phased in. We don't care if it's lower than what you proposed earlier. We do not want one.
Speaker Dowd has publicly said that it will not
Yeah,
happen
he said it in a
under
number
his
of
watch.
venues now that he does not want it. And then Chair Kelly of the Transportation Finance Committee and also of the Conference Committee basically said, we're not going to go there at all, ever, not, no.
And we have a number of members who have signed our gas tax protection pledge.
That's
both
right.
With us
They don't
and
have
with
the
radio
votes.
show.
Even if they compromise, they don't have the votes. So at this point, it does not look likely, hopefully, knock on wood. The other thing that the Senate Democrats said they would do is that their vaunted transit tax for the 7-county metro,
Barf.
that they would actually let some of that money be dedicated to roads and bridges. In other words, it wouldn't be 100% going to transit. It would be, some of it would be, and they didn't say how much, but they said some of it could be dedicated to roads and bridges. Maybe ones that they need for the transit to work. I don't know. But anyway, that was
Well,
the
I
other.
support that if it's a percent, say 100%.
Yeah, it wouldn't be 100%.
No, I still don't support
It'd
the
probably
gas-
be
the tax
5%
increase.
for roads and bridges that have, they have to fix in order to have the transit work for them.
Right.
But anyway, so those were the two things they conceded. After that concession was made, then the House made an offer, counter offer, which was they would consider the metro area sales tax increase for mass transit, but in exchange, they would require a Met Council reform. And this is actually pretty interesting because what they included in this reform, they would have staggered terms for the members, and that the members would be chosen from elected representatives, in other words, like county commissioners and city officials, that they would be drawn from that pool. So they would be elected people, but they wouldn't be, it's not like we would have elections for Met Council representative.
Right.
So that was kind of the counteroffer in that mix. It actually, the staggered terms, parts of that proposal actually were passed in the Senate last week, and the Senate Republicans took exception to it. Most of them were against that proposal because they didn't want to see that kind of reform for the Met Council. I actually did a post about this week, which was entitled Real Reform, Not Fake Reform for the Met Council. And because, once again, I mean, you've got an entity which at its base, Republicans should not want. If they don't want to grow government, if they want to try to keep government from interfering in every single part of people's lives, then the Met Council is something that doesn't just need reform, it needs to be mostly dismantled.
Yes.
And the fact that its reach is now in so many areas of government, and it's really, as I put it, a replacement for the legislature. It's what it's trying to do.
Well, almost everything that the Met Council does could be done by the counties, by the state. There are already entities that can do almost everything that they do.
If they need to cooperate, we do have this mechanism of the Joint Powers Agreement. Not a huge fan of it, but it's a more limited way to deal with some of these issues.
And the other argument is that you need the Met Council to get the federal funds for transit.
Right.
But there's the CTIB, there are other mechanisms to get those monies if someone were supportive
Or
of
even
transit.
just have it be taken back by MnDOT.
Legislature. Yeah, MnDOT.
MnDOT,
Exactly.
because it's undercutting MnDOT and it's undercutting the legislature's ability to do things. I mean, they are able to do many things. They have their own bonding authority. For a while there, I don't know if it's still true, they had a better credit rating than the state did in terms of their being able to bond.
Of course, because they can tax without asking you if
Exactly,
you
that's a wonderful situation for a bondholder. You have an entity that doesn't ever have to ask for money because it has regular monies flowing into it. So, yeah, I mean, we would certainly hate to see a tax increase based on a lick and a promise for reform. And that's what this is, really. And also the fact that you're changing up the representation, putting people in there that probably will then have a stake in continuing to grow the Met Council does not bode well for future reform, no matter what kind of reform the legislature tries to do with it. And it's just a very difficult path to reform. I don't necessarily see a way to reform the Met Council unless you get people who are serious about reforming the Met Council in both the governor's office and in the legislative branch. I don't see it. But the question is, do we take a little bit of reform now, or do we do we hope and pray that in the future that someone will take this on?
Well, Margaret, I don't know that I even call it reform. I think I'd call it a minor change. So you've got a minor
Right.
change, and that
A
minor
tweak.
change,
A
that
tweak.
the tweak would stand in the way of real reform.
Yes,
They
I
would
think
say,
so.
hey, we reformed it, but really it isn't.
No.
So we'd rather
No,
have
it's
them.
establishing it further,
Yes.
embedding it into as a fourth branch of government, basically.
Exactly, exactly. But we do have the governor riding to the rescue on Monday. He has his own plan that's coming out. What have we heard about that?
Well, not much, except that he said that there would be stuff in it that the Democrat Senate would not like, and there would be stuff that the Republican GOP House would not like. So he said it would be the way forward. So I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It's intriguing that he decided to describe it that way, but we don't really know what that means. We've had a lot of fanfare from both sides, actually, saying that they've got a new offer for the table, and then it turns out the new offer looks a lot like what the original offer was, with maybe
Right.
a couple things different thrown in. So I don't know. I mean, it could be same old, or it could be something completely different.
So Monday is 7 days, 1 week from the end of session.
Right.
And if we have brand new concepts, how does that get through committees? How does that get through all this process? It can't. So again, it looks to me like even the governor is saying, let's go to special session. We know we're not going to finish this on time.
Well,
Let's find another way to get there.
Yeah, I think though, if it's something that's it really shakes everything up, then I think that what they could probably do is, as much as they could, and bring the session to a conclusion, and then have a 1 day special session to wrap it up once all the pieces are in place.
Right.
I think that's a possibility if they're close. If it's not at all close, then I think it'll be a signal that they're going to finish without doing anything.
Right.
And if, in a lot of ways, I mean, the DFL position has been wanting to call this a do-nothing session from day one. And so if the governor comes out with something outrageous that the Republicans won't accept, they have a perfect setup for that, because they walk away and then it becomes a do-nothing session.
Which, as a conservative, we should be happy with.
Yeah.
This is the session. This is the session where they should have done, conceivably they should have been working on a bonding bill and not much else on the table. But last session they couldn't finish the tax bill. They did a lights on transportation bill because they couldn't finish the transportation bill. And here we are at the end of this session again, and it's going behind closed doors. The legislators that you've elected will not have a voice. They will be told what to do at the end. And the Democrats are set up for the argument that nothing got done because of split government.
Right.
That is concerning. So, supplemental spending, the last of the big four. Margaret, what is happening with those bills?
Well, to refresh your memory, we had 3 bills in the House that passed, and we had 1 big bill in the Senate that passed that have all of the different departments and topics in them for things that the legislature wants to spend more money on this year, spend the surplus. Plus, remember, there was a rump of stuff that did not get passed last year in terms of spending, and so we had some money left over that was budgeted, wasn't budgeted because they couldn't come to an agreement. So there's a lot of odds and ends in these bills, in the supplemental spending bill project, I guess we could say, because it's now one big project, because they're having one big meeting. Chair Cohen from the Senate, Chair Knobloch from the House, and they're meeting with each of the different sections of the bill and trying to figure out if there's any overlap that they can pass between these two bills, two houses, I should say, with the multi-layered, leveled bill project they have with them. On the conference committee, you have members, chairs of various committees that are probably the most significant ones: HHS, Chair Dean, and in the Senate, Lori, Chair Loon, and Chair Uyghur, and so forth. But they really haven't done the deep dive yet. They're probably going to do that this weekend. They didn't even meet last night, but they're kind of on hold because obviously all these odds and ends are on hold for these bigger pieces that we've already talked about. So all they've done so far is done the walkthrough, as they call it, the bill, which is it's like watching paint dry, right? I mean, Basically it's them just
talking through the side by side.
The nonpartisan staff saying this, going through not line by line, but section by section of the bills. And bills are, of course, 3 bills, and the one big bill are incredibly long. It was funny to watch a couple of the asides. It's good to watch it it's hard to watch the whole thing. I kind of have it on in the background and listen for comments. For example, when they got to the education portion, of course, the senators aren't familiar with the House bill at all, and so when things come up that they don't understand, they ask questions about it, and so Drazkowski's amendment, when it came up, Chair Loon, who's on the conference committee, had to explain to Senator Cohen what the deal was with this disclosure thing that Drazkowski had amended onto the floor, which was that if the school districts get the equity pay, they have to make a plan for it. There has to be a disclosure meeting. And so he asked a lot of questions about that, trying to figure out, what was this about? Why?
How opposed to this am I?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. He said after she'd finished explaining it, he said, "Oh, I understand it, but we'll have to see about that." So I think he's keyed in already to the fact that was kind of a floor amendment on the House,
Right.
and that probably he's going to try to gut it.
Yep.
So anyway, that's the way that worked out. Where occasionally senators will ask questions and try to figure stuff out, and it gives you some insight into what they're looking at in the House bills. On the House side, Chair Garofalo had a lot of questions about the energy portion of the Senate bill and trying to figure out, kind of where they were at. And but so far, it's a back and forth kind of easygoing thing. There's not much signaling going on. People don't make big speeches or anything, because really all they're doing is going through the bill piece by piece, or the bills, I should say, piece by piece. At parts they slow them down when they're technical. Other parts they speed up. There was at one point the public safety nonpartisan researcher was going really slow, and Chair Knobloch was like, "You can just go section by section. You don't have to go and explain every single thing about this yet." So I think he was getting a little bored, and he's got a high tolerance for this kind of thing. So if he's getting a little glazed over,
Just
then
imagine.
that it's just everybody else probably asleep. So anyway. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that's happening, and it's it's a part that's formal, and they just have to do it. But clearly, when Senator Cohen shows up late from dinner or whatever, the dinner break, they just go on and keep going, and
Right.
it's on his watch, and obviously he's got other members there watching. So if there's any questions and stuff, they can raise them later. But yeah, it's very slow, it's tedious, but they have to do it, and this is a great time to do it while the other people are negotiating the important parts of the package.
Right. All right. So, Margaret, 1 week to go here.
Yep.
What do we anticipate this week? What do we see happening? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Monday comes up.
Yep.
And the session is over.
Well, I think Monday we're going to hear from the governor.
On transportation.
On transportation, and generally, I think his tone will guide the rest of them to decide whether we're going to have a deal or no deal.
So it depends how many fish he catches and whether.
Whether they have nice weather or not.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure his staff are hard at work on something and will present something on Monday, and it's just a matter of whether he's like, "Screw you, I'm going home," or whether it's like he said, let's try to work on some of this stuff. In the past, he's surprised people both ways, taking things on board that we thought were things that he was not going to budge on, and then also just going totally nuts and saying, "I'm not doing anything, and it's all your fault."
Right. The governor is notoriously independent at times of his staff, in that he makes decisions, he says no, 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 and all of a sudden he makes a decision to say yes, or
Yep.
vice versa.
Right.
His staff doesn't know about it, so that could potentially happen here.
Right. Well, one thing that the media has noticed, I think it's been reported this way, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's certainly, we don't have as many of the histrionics that we had last time, and talking about with him and Bach being at odds.
Right.
It seems like they're working to get more together this time. I don't know if it's because Bach got the resistance from his caucus or not. Probably because,
Remember that Bach almost lost his job.
He almost lost his job.
They had a meeting that went till early morning hours after the end of session about whether he would stay as Senate
Yup.
leader or not.
Absolutely.
And he had to meet with those folks and talk to them.
Yep.
One of the commitments was the Southwest Light rail corridor.
Yes.
And where that will rear its head, that'll
Right.
be interesting to see.
Well, yeah, one thing, we didn't really talk about it much, but the transit tax, pretty much, that is the piece that they want that transit tax for. I mean, that they need that for that funding to show commitment to the feds, for the federal government to sign onto it. Another thing that I left out of the Republican offer was that they did say that they weren't going to fund Southwest Light Rail. That was one thing that they drew the line. Yeah, no gas tax, no Southwest Light Rail. And I think that was the thing that jumped out at Dibble when he said it's no different than what you've been offering, because those are the only two things he really cares about, a gas tax and Southwest Light Rail. As long as those things weren't on the table anymore,
There's nothing
else to talk about. Yeah, so that was something that we probably, that it's a good thing you mentioned that, because that's pretty important to them.
All right, so just those 7 days left remaining, and we'll see it behind closed doors.
Yeah,
You'll hear
Monday
about it
is
in
the day.
media.
We'll see whether the governor is serious about trying to do a deal or whether he's not interested in doing a deal.
Okay. But it's going to be behind closed doors. There'll be
Until
media
then.
coverage. You'll see
then.
the leadership exiting and entering the governor's mansion
All weekend
for
long, probably.
negotiations.
Yep.
And basically, your legislator isn't going to have a say in the final outcome.
Yeah, unless your legislator is one of the key chairs in in some of these areas. For example, I expect that Kelly and Dibble will be involved in this at a pretty high level, because transportation is a big deal. And then certainly the speaker and the majority leader and these other folks will be in the deal making. But yeah, your regular legislators who are just part of the committee's structure, no, probably not.
Right.
They'll get their marching orders once the deal is cut, if it is cut.
But they still have a say. If this is not a good deal for the taxpayers in Minnesota, we expect our legislators to say no.
Right.
We expect them to be concerned about cooperation and competition with our neighboring states. We are hearing through the Star Tribune article about other states are surpassing us in creating wealth and creating opportunity.
Or not pushing it away.
Yeah, it's like a magnet. You're either drawing it or you're pushing it.
Or you're
One or the other.
repelling it.
Repelling.
Yeah.
And anyway, so competitiveness is an issue. And we expect our legislators, if the deal that their leadership comes together with is a bad deal, to say no.
Right.
That is not unreasonable. So right now is the time to communicate with your legislators. Make sure that you are letting them know how you feel about these potential outcomes. Whether this gas tax is going to happen, whether the transit tax is going to happen, whether we're going to have a huge spending bill, supplemental spending bill, whether we will have tax cuts that include Social Security,
Yes.
Revamping that so that we're not one of the 7 states that are paying Social Security tax on our Social Security benefits, veterans benefits, property tax. Everything is up in the air right now,
Right.
and it's time to concentrate and participate. So we will continue at the Taxpayers League to update you. We have an update that is coming out shortly about what has happened this week. We still have our chart of where all these bills are.
Yep.
That will be updated and delivered. This podcast is always a good source of information. You can join us at taxpayersleague.org. Come to our website. We would love to have you donate to us so we can continue to communicate with you as we would like to throughout the session, and join us in this process, because this is the time that it happens. It's not time to sit back on our laurels and go fishing. This is the time to get out there and fight. Get out there and let them know where you stand on these issues.
Yep.
All right, I'm Ted Lilly, President of the Taxpayers League.
And I'm Margaret Martine, Research Director of the Taxpayers League.
10 days to go. Let's get out there and make sure we're communicating with our legislators. Thanks for joining us.
I'll be looking for you.